thoughts that will switch gears a little bit from yesterday. As I point out, there's intelligent design, creation science, and then there's Bible science. Yesterday I was emphasizing Bible science, and so we were looking to Revelation and to Scripture to lay the framework for our Bible science, and we talked about the six-day creation, which outside of Revelation from Genesis chapter 1, we wouldn't know that God used 6 days to create everything. But we know it now because the Bible says so. Now, we're going to switch gears a little bit this week because Friday night, an evolutionist, Dr. Evolution, will be here to debate y'all. Now, the only way you're going to be ready for Dr. Evolution is to be equipped with some of the science to present a credible case for the creation science model. So that's what we'll be doing this week. And tonight we'll begin with the science behind the creation science. Now, it's been said that the Bible is not a science book, and that's true, it's not a science book, but it is scientifically correct. And what we're going to begin to lay the groundwork for this evening is understanding the science behind the Bible. After all, the Bible being correct, it shouldn't surprise us that we ought to be able to apply the scientific method in creation and come up with the same conclusions, right? Would that surprise anybody here? No? See, I didn't think so. All right. Well, we're going to look at a couple of slides and pictures here to make it a little easier. I'm going to slow the pace down from last night. I understand a little feedback that there was a lot of information. But that's all right. You see, we wanted to get through the 6 days of creation, and I'll guarantee you that was a very little amount, a very small portion of all that can be said about the 6 days. But what you have to do is pick and choose those bite-sized pieces that you want that are important for the moment. And so we accomplished our goal last night. All right. This is a series that I bring to university campuses. I give different presentations depending on who my audience is. And our audience this evening being a church and Christian, and there might be some who are not. And that's all right. What I'm doing is I'm presenting the case for creation science. As I mentioned last night, in a university setting, a secular crowd, a science educated crowd, what I do is I point out that the creation science model is a credible scientific model. And I'm going to talk about models in a little bit here because I'm going to lay some groundwork just so we're all brought up to speed. Because Dr. Evolution is a real slippery guy. And to really try and nail him, you're going to need a little background, a little philosophy of science. And Jenny was reminding me over here, this group, there's a row here from Wasilla and Brother Chase here. I've known him since I first heard about him and his brother, I think in Colorado, I guess.
Yes.
It goes back that far, many years ago, and then went out as a missionary family up to Russia when the Iron Curtain came down. Jenny reminded me of something here, but she was up at a North Pole. Was it the North Pole Church? Yeah. Now this group, I'll tell you what, they were working hard all week long. I've never seen any group of people work so hard to defeat Dr. Evolution. So, yes?
Could you tell us who Dr. Evolution is? Is that his real name?
Dr. Evolution is really, he goes incognito, and he uses that as an alias because he really doesn't want you to know his real, true identity, at least for that moment. But this guy is slippery, I'll tell you. And in the past 30-some years that I've had him debate crowds, he has never lost a debate yet. That's why I bring up. I've had some churches. I had one big deacon. I'll tell you what. He just about got out of his chair. He was sitting in a row right about third, fourth row from the front. He just about got up and clobbered Dr. Evolution. Anyway, I'll have you guys ready. I'll share with you all the information you need to present a good case. And I'll show you, I'll talk about how to win a debate. But after the debate, then we'll do an analysis of the debate. And we'll talk about what worked, what didn't work, and why it works or doesn't work. And it's very instructive. And that's why we have Dr. Evolution come and share his part. All right. Now, here we have this word empirical. I have to define some words. Someone mentioned last night, why do I use such big words? You know, there are lexicons out here in the world, and one of them we call Bible lexicons. A lexicon, there's another big word, isn't it? Lexicon, what's a lexicon? A lexicon is a dictionary for a specialty field, all right? So you can have a medical lexicon, or you can have a Bible lexicon. You know, if you get your Strong's Concordance out, what do you have at the back of that? A lexicon. Young's Exhaustive Concordance, you've got a lexicon. And so a lexicon simply means dictionary. Well, here we have this word empirical up here. What does empirical mean? Well, just think of empirical as physical. Material, part of the physical material world. This is a word that is used in science all the time. They don't say physical, they say empirical. All right, so if you want to sound scientific, you just say empirical evidence. You don't say physical evidence, empirical evidence. So empirical evidence for supernatural origins. Now, that might sound rather odd, because really what we're saying is natural evidence in support of supernatural origins. Now, this really confuses the naturalist. The naturalist is one who says you must restrict all of your explanations to physical, natural things like in this world. Things that you can weigh, measure, taste, feel, see. If you can't see it or measure it or have any way of getting your hands on it, it's supernatural. And if you can't get your hands on it to measure it, then it can't be scientific. Why not? Because science is all about measuring that which you are studying. And how can you put God in a test tube? You can't. But you see, that really is an argument of convenience on the side of the evolutionists. It's true that you can't put God in a test tube. You can't test the supernatural. But no creationist has ever claimed that you can test the supernatural. I've never met a creationist who has ever said that, and yet, if you listen to the evolutionists, that's what creation is all about. It's all about religion and revelation and thinking that you can test the supernatural. And then they say, what kind of idiots are you anyway? Well, that is their straw man argument. It has nothing to do with what we're presenting here. The empirical case for the supernatural is to determine what happened, not who and not how, but did or is the supernatural the very best explanation for the origin of all things? A little preview, just to help you understand what I'm saying here. The first law of thermodynamics, which is a law derived empirically from the physical and natural laboratories and experience of the world, first law of thermodynamics says energy cannot create itself. In other words, nothing comes from nothing. Something cannot come from nothing. That is a law of science. Well, guess what? Here you have the law of science that says that something cannot come from nothing, and the creation scientist looks at that and says, well, everything that exists is energy. It's physical, yes, but the physical laws one of the physical laws that govern the behavior of matter and energy says it can't happen this way. It can't come into being by itself. Well, if it can't come in by natural means, then it's logical to suggest that it came about supernaturally. All right? So we'll have fun with this. But this is how we derive, or what I mean by empirical laws can lead to a supernatural conclusion. All right. Now, I already gave part of my testimony yesterday morning in particular. I'm a microbiologist by professional training. I'm called by the Lord to be a preacher, and I serve as a missionary to academic communities. And then part of my background while I was at the University of Arkansas, being in the natural sciences, put me smack dab in the controversy between creation and evolution. And as I mentioned last night, I started college as an atheist. I was an evolutionist. I was steeped in evolution, trained that way, and then in my philosophy, literature, and history classes, we were trained in why there can be no God. I mean, that 3/4, 3 different themes, why there can't be a God. So I was really conditioned for this. Been on both sides of the fence. But in the course of 13 years there in college and training in the natural sciences, getting a degree in zoology and then going into the natural sciences for a degree, and then went on, got my PhD in medical microbiology and immunology and infectious diseases. By the time I finished up, it's impossible for anyone to go through that path of natural sciences, 13 years of college, and not know what evolution is. Because that's what the natural sciences are all about. They're steeped in evolution. But I became a creationist by a miracle of God during that period of time. And I was writing articles in the newspaper and doing interviews for some of the local media and making some noise anyway. I talked to Dr. Dwayne Gish from San Diego out there in the Institute for Creation Research, because I had him up in Fayetteville to do a lecture series for us during the 1981 Balanced Treatment Act, when Arkansas was engaged in the politics of that, trying to teach creation, give creation science model equal time as evolution. And we were sitting in the car talking about things, and I was just starting graduate work, and he said, you know, if you hope to get out of school with a graduate degree, I guarantee you better not let anyone know that you're a creationist. And he was just about right. People were, as he was telling me, there's a lot of guys who are getting kicked out of their departments and denied their degrees. In fact, that almost happened to me. I did get into the department. I was just about ready to complete my program, about six months away from my dissertation. And we had a number of meetings, a series of meetings during that period of time that I was in school, because the faculty had a lot of complaints about me. I mean, you got this guy in your department who's a creationist. I mean, how can you allow that to happen? Dr. Smith called me into the office for the first meeting, and he said, a lot of the faculty is very upset with you about this article you just wrote in the newspaper, and as the head of the department, I'm responsible to represent the faculty and let you know that we're very unhappy about this and wish you wouldn't do that. I said, well, what's the concern? The concern was, well, people might get the idea that we are creationists up here. And I did smile. I said, well, Dr. Smith, I seriously doubt that anyone will really think that, because it's never been suggested in any way. And I don't sign my name. I don't sign that I represent the microbiology department or anything like that. Well, in this last meeting, 6 months before getting my degree, we had this meeting. We went around the round table, and all the faculty were there and asked me questions about science, what it is not. And Dr. Paulson called me into his office after they sent me out and had a vote about my fate. And he said, you're going to be allowed conditionally, but I want to let you know it's not a unanimous decision. There are people who want you out of here. And the first condition was I had to stop writing articles in the newspaper and stop doing interviews for the local media. What is that word? What do they call it? Censorship. I mean, who is the biggest? I mean, where's the loudest noise coming from when you talk about censorship? Why, it's the other side. Here they were practicing censorship, and I said, well, that's fine, 6 months. I can do that. I won't say anything in the newspaper anyway. 1 week later, here comes this old interview that I had done in the Grapevine newspaper. I tell you what, I thought that was dead and gone, but there it was, popped up 1 week after this was put on me. It really shows there's quite a web, an underground. These people communicate, and they do everything they can to put a stop to creation and to anything. If you're serving the Lord, they're trying to, Satan pulls a lot of strings. Now, the second stipulation is I had to take another class in evolution, and when I showed up to that class, I was the student. They set up the entire semester class just for me. And so I went through that semester class, and we met once a week, and he gave me a stack of materials to read, and then we talked about it on Friday. Never got into anything controversial. We were talking about mutation, natural selection, gene flow, and Hardy-Weinberg equations and all this. This sort of thing that is just, it's just about adaptation and variation that occurs within species that already exist. And he said, I'm surprised you're so open-minded. I said, well, Dr. Carr, you know, the only reason why you think I'm so open-minded because you've been listening to the critics of creation science. You've been listening to the straw man arguments. You really don't know what a creationist thinks. So he told me he really enjoyed our meetings as much as I enjoyed talking to him. And there were a number of things that I challenged him with. Like I said, I was pointing out, you know, the bias of naturalism is such an unscientific approach in our field that if I were to ask you, what if God did create, would you be able to draw the conclusion that it is possible to conclude, if all the evidence leads you to it, could you conclude that God did create? You know, he couldn't answer that question. You know why? Because there are blinders on. It's called naturalism. It stems from the Middle Ages and an argument called the presumption of atheism. Now, why do they call it a presumption? There's absolutely no basis for it whatsoever. That's why. But the idea is, I will start out with nothing, no nothing, there's no God, nothing, and now you have to prove everything to me. Until you can prove God, I don't believe in God, and I won't include God in any explanation. But as I will show you this week, there is good reason to believe not only that there is a God, but that God did create all things. All right, how are we doing? I'm looking at eyes, and everyone's still with me. I want to make sure that we're not going too quickly here. I know the Alaskans really love this. I think this, the chicken or the egg. Now, isn't that a classic question that is asked? And yet, as common and mundane as it really seems, it really is very profound in its answers for this reason. Because we're really asking the question, did God create man or did man create God? You see, in ancient Greece, there was the proposal that man actually has created God, that God is a figment of man's imagination and is a product of man's imagination. That's where God came from. And so what we can do then is set this up that did God create man or did man create God? And that's really what's being debated here in this question, the chicken or the egg first. All right, let's lay some groundwork of what science is. Because oftentimes there's confusion about what the scientist is saying if we're not really, if we're not drawn into that experience. So we have to cover a few points. The root meaning of science is knowledge. That is, we ought to know about our world so we can discover what is true about our world. And the end goal the end goal should be truth. Of course, we're all about truth. We know about truth. And we want to be right, right? That's our goal. We don't want to just debate and argue for the purpose of winning. We want to be right, because you really win when you're right. And so that's really what we're after. So let's look at how we can use science. We apply the scientific method. What's involved in the scientific method? You probably, depending on who you read and what textbook you've used, you've seen many different things. But it really comes down to these three things: observation, interpretation, experimentation. And if you look at other arrangements or other words that are used, I'll guarantee you can fit it all into observation, interpretation, experimentation. The nice thing about this, and this is how science works, you observe the world, you make an interpretation to explain your observation, and then you experiment to test to see if your interpretation is correct, and that experiment leads to more observation, which leads to another interpretation, which leads to more experimentation, which leads to more observation, interpretation, experimentation, observation, interpretation, experimentation. That's science. I realized when I got into that, man, I've got the personality and the type. I am a perfect fit for this. Just not every personality is cut out for it, because you don't have ultimately an end goal. I mean, it just keeps going and going and going. Some people need an end point. But there are a few of us who don't care about endpoints. We can just keep going and going and going just to see what else is out there. And it just keeps going around in this endless loop. Every day is a new day. Every day in the lab is something new. I mean, nothing is old. Nothing is the same. Some of the experiments the techniques are repetitious, but there's always something new you're discovering. Now, here's something important to understand about models and about the scientific method. This is the interpretive phase: observation, interpretation, experimentation. This is part of the interpretation phase. That what a scientist does is he's using his thinking power, reasoning skills, and his observations to propose an explanation, the interpretation. That initial interpretation is called a hypothesis. It's more than just a lucky hunch or a guess. You don't have that sort of thing going on in the laboratory. There is really a rationale behind some proposal. Now, that hypothesis is something that the scientist will take, is something personal, take it into the lab and test it. Now, let's say that he finds out he can't prove himself wrong. Important concept. What did I say? He goes in the laboratory and he can't prove himself wrong. What does that mean? It means that science takes the approach that you can't prove anything right. You can prove something wrong. And if you can't prove something wrong, it might be right. All right, this is how science works. That's what's absolute about science is, I can show you wrong. But when it comes to being right, I don't know for sure. Because ultimately you'd have to know everything, and you'd have to have as much knowledge and memory about everything that exists in the entire universe to know exactly what is right. And nobody can claim that. Tomorrow we might make discoveries of things that we didn't know about today, and so that might change our hypothesis. So we have hypothesis. Now, let's say in the laboratory, man, I can't prove myself wrong. Wow, I might be right. So then you get excited about it, you write about it in peer-reviewed journals, and you publish it out there for your other friends who are also interested in the same topic, and they go in their laboratory, and guess what they're going to do?
Test it.
They're going to test it. By what means? How do you test in science? Trying to prove it wrong.
Yeah.
They're going to try and prove you wrong. That's what they're going to do. Now, I'm just emphasizing this because this is the proper way to think about science. They're not trying to prove something right. This is why you hear scientists say, you can't prove anything. You can't be absolutely certain about anything. See what they're getting at? This is what drives them crazy when they come up against, in conversation with someone who believes in the Bible and that there is a God, and you're so certain, you're absolute, and it drives them crazy because there's no way that anyone can know anything absolutely with 100% certainty. That's true from their perspective. In the field of science, you can't prove anything for sure. Now, let's say in the laboratory all your friends try to prove you wrong and they can't. Well, that guy just might be right. And so now it becomes a theory. Because nobody can prove you wrong. And so far, it hasn't gone through enough testing to be established as a law yet. But after 100 years, or maybe even before that, thousands of experiments, not a single exception, no reason to think that it might be overthrown, then the theory becomes a law. And that's how interpretations start out. Hypothesis to theory to law. A law of science is the closest thing we can get to proof. All right? Closest, I say. Now, I'll tell you, here's how I like to illustrate this. I was given a presentation. There was a physicist in the, a professor from the physics department in the audience, and I was talking about the first law of thermodynamics and how the first law of thermodynamics leads us to the conclusion that there must be a supernatural origin. And I was emphasizing the law of thermodynamics. He said, laws are meant to be broken. Yeah. You know what I said? I absolutely agree. That's the scientist. See, what I just told you is how the scientist thinks. The scientist is not content with what might be right. All right? Now, for the naturalist, and here's how I finish this up. I said, I have no disagreement with that. You can try and break the law all you want. I mean, that's science. But good modeling, good explanations for the origin, or any type of explanation, a good, credible scientific explanation must never violate a known law of science. And the known law of science that exists today are the laws of thermodynamics, for which there are no known exceptions and no reason to ever think that they will be overthrown. And the only model that conforms consistently and is in support, or is supported by the laws of thermodynamics, is the creation science model. You see, that is the way to present it. That's what makes the creation science model credible and, as of today, irrefutable. Now, sure, tomorrow, as a scientist, and scientists think, yes, tomorrow we might discover something and just blow all our laws of science out of the water. That's fine. I don't have a problem with that at all. I don't think it's going to happen. And I don't mind anyone who wants to spend all their time and money to do that kind of research. It's no problem. What I say is, as of today, we know this, and any credible explanation of science must conform to that which is known now, and not what you hope for tomorrow. You see, if you want to use that kind of thinking, Mother Goose stories could be considered true today because of what we might find tomorrow. That's not science. The creation science model has it hands down. All right. So that's why this is so important to understand. I'm drawing you in and helping you understand how scientists think. Here's another very important thing about science. Models are used to explain data. They do not have to be 100% correct. Why? Because there's no such thing as knowing anything for 100% certain. That's why. Now, most of you have been taught and trained in high school and college Newtonian physics. But Newtonian physics is inaccurate. It's inaccurate. Well, why are we still taught Newtonian physics? It's been replaced, as far as accuracy, it's been replaced by quantum mechanics. Well, one of the reasons why you're not taught this in high school and you're not taught this in college is because the math is just way out there. I mean, nobody would be able to learn it. I say nobody, I'm exaggerating, but it is hard stuff. You think Newtonian physics and calculus is hard, you haven't seen anything yet till you get into quantum. But here's really the main reason why Newtonian physics still is taught today in college. It's because it works for the most part. It works. If you're calculating baseball speed and path and trajectory, it works fine. Newtonian physics is based on straight line physics, straight line motion. But it turns out de Broglie, an Italian graduate student, was thinking about this puzzling mystery of the behavior of photons, light, energy. And one of the things that you discover about photons is photons are particle, but they're wave. Anybody ever heard of that strange phenomenon? Wave, but they're particle, but it's particle and it's wave. How do you bring the two together? De Broglie proposed in his graduate work that all things, all matter, particles travel in waves. See, that was counterintuitive because you see so much traveling in straight lines. Did the research, did the experimentation, guess what? Everything travels in waves. Even the Earth is traveling in a wave as it orbits the sun. Even the baseball, fastball, is traveling in a wave. But you see, at such huge, in such large bodies, the straight line is adequate to measure because that wave is so insignificant, so small. It's there, but it's very insignificant. You don't actually see the problem of Newtonian physics until you get down to the atomic level and you're looking at the electron trying to measure its speed. Some people like to find those things out. How fast does the electron travel anyway around the nucleus of the atom? And it's not traveling in a straight line, but it's so tiny, so small, that it's in a wave motion. And imagine going through the mountains here, and you're hiking and you're doing this, right? Boy, it's not a straight line hike. You're going up and down, up and down. That little electron is doing this. And so when they were working on the atomic bomb, they discovered, you know, this is not working. What's wrong? What's wrong is when you get down that level, at molecular level, everything, you have to factor in the wave motion. Newtonian physics is sufficient for larger bodies. It works, but it's not really accurate. Isn't that interesting? Einstein was the one who blew that out of the water and introduced a whole new change of thinking about physics. Models don't have to be 100% correct to work. Now, I was asked a question up at the University of Minnesota last week when I was at the campus there. And a chemical engineer asked the question, well, considering all the wonderful advances and discoveries that we've made in the framework of evolution, what can the creation science model offer? I mean, how can it improve on what we've been able to do with evolution? And that's when I point out, number one, accuracy. Accuracy. You see, the creation science model would be like quantum is to Newtonian physics. It's more accurate. It works. And the second thing I point out, there isn't anything being done in the evolutionary model that can't be done within the creation science framework. And so we want to be accurate, don't we? I mean, that's what science is all about. All right, just a couple more preliminaries here to understand what science is all about. Legitimate, this is the word, legitimate credibility for a scientific model. It must meet these four criteria. It needs to explain the data. It needs to be supported by the data. It does not contradict laws of science. This is a remarkable thing when you think about evolution and origins. How they insist that it's a fact and it's the only legitimate scientific explanation for origins, and yet they're in violation to the natural laws that exist. And they need to be able to make predictions. All right? So these are things that need to be a part of your explanation. Now, let's talk about one other thing that's very important about models of origins. Not all models, just models of origins. Models that deal with the origin of the universe, origin of life, and origin of species are limited. They're not unscientific, they're just limited. In what way are they limited? Well, they're limited because you can't reproduce these things in the laboratory. The evolutionists can't go in the laboratory and reproduce the unlimited potential of change and produce mass numbers of new species. They can't do it. They haven't done it. I'm going to show you that Wednesday. So we've got past events. We'll never repeat it. But remember, forensic science and archaeology and paleontology is studying old events in the times past. They can't reproduce that in the laboratory, can they? No. But it's not considered unscientific. That is the model of science, origins as well. They're limited, but they're not unscientific. What that means is they'll remain a theory. They'll never become a law of science. Look at this. Here's a Nobel Prize winner, evolutionist, who said the evolutionary events that took place over a period of many thousands of years cannot be reproduced in the laboratory. How many have heard that? Probably none of you. You see, it doesn't show up in the textbooks, but here is an admission. Evolution cannot be reproduced in the laboratory. Doesn't make it unscientific, it makes it limited. Alright? Alright. Now, just a little note about evolution and the bias and the danger of bias. Evolution arbitrarily assumes the presumption of atheism. That is, it excludes supernatural regardless of what the evidence is. We're not going to entertain the idea that there can be a God or a supernatural origin. That means they're forcing the facts to the conclusion. That's a preclusion. They already know what the conclusion is before they even study it. They have to offer a natural explanation. So even though the first and second laws of thermodynamics says energy cannot create itself nor organize itself by natural means, the evolutionist, the naturalist, says it happened that way anyway. We just don't know how, but it did happen that way by natural means. Even though the law says it can't. That's why a physicist can say the laws are meant to be broken. They're waiting for these laws to be broken and come down so that they can explain how all this came to be by natural means. Now, I say that's fine. There's nothing unscientific about that. What's unscientific about it is when you say that evolution as a model, as an explanation, is a fact, and it's rooted in facts and observation when it's not. They are claiming that it's fact based on what they hope to find tomorrow. That's not science. All right. Here's the evidences that we're going to be looking at for the creation science model. And we're going to take it one step at a time as well. But these evidences are the very things that I take into a university setting and present to a secular crowd and to a skeptical crowd. So I'm going to take you into the actual heart of the debate process here. We have intelligent design. We have first law of thermodynamics, second law of thermodynamics, law of biogenesis, law of probabilities, laboratory research, and then for speciation, we've got speciation research, fossil record that we'll be looking at as well, and demonstrating, hey, these are all evidences for the creation science model. All right, let's start out with intelligent design and just the design question. I've got Dr. Thaxton up here, with his quote, which is very important because the creation idea of presenting a design explanation is criticized by the evolutionists because they say you cannot test design because that requires the ability to test for the purpose and the intent of the designer himself. Hogwash. That's not true. But that's what they say. You cannot test for design. The design test explanation is unscientific. And here we have Dr. Thaxton is saying, in ordinary life, we do this all the time. We distinguish the natural from the intelligent. That's nothing new. Paleontology, anybody? How do you discern the difference between an arrowhead and just a rock that's been polished in the river? I mean, can you tell the difference between an arrowhead and a sharp rock that's just been naturally ground down by the sand and the water? You see, this is the process that we use all the time. It's a part of science to distinguish that between that which is intelligently designed and that which is naturally made. Now, anybody know or heard about the SETI program? I love this after saying this. You know, the evolutionist says you can't use design arguments unscientific. It's unscientific. SETI program, anyone? The Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. The SETI program is set up. We've been spending millions of dollars looking for life in outer space. And what is the basis for looking for life for outer space? Intelligent design. I'll tell you what, this criticism against creationists using the design argument is pure hypocrisy. These guys are looking for evidence out in outer space that there is intelligent design signals. You see, we're sending signals out in outer space right now. Radio signals, microwave signals, laser signals. We're sending all kinds of signals out there under this premise. That is, if there is intelligent life out in outer space, and they're going to be scanning the heavens like we are scanning the heavens, they're going to find our signal, and they're going to be able to recognize that that was intelligently designed and not just mass X-ray or some electromagnetic pattern being blasted out by our sun or by other stars. That is, intelligent life will be able to distinguish between that which is naturally made and that which is intelligently designed. You see the hypocrisy in that? But you can't say that there's a God. You can say it's an alien out in space, maybe, but not a God. Good grief. And that's called science. You see, this is why I like to throw up there the old Indian cliche with the elephant, because when you got the blinders on, you can't see the obvious and the hypocrisy behind this. But the argument is, and the thinking is, if there's design, it would require a designer. Oh, look what we've got here. Now, here we've got the code of life. That is the alphabet, spelled out with A, T, and C, and G, adenine, thymine, guanine, cytosine. And this DNA code, this molecule right here, is just a string of A, T, G, and C, and T, and so on, and read in triplets. That's why they're grouped in triplets there. That's the code of life. That's what determines what you look like. That's what determines whether you have blue eyes or brown eyes, or whether you're built for Alaskan cold or you have to live in the tropics. One way or another, you're all genetically related and coded. You've got an incredible amount of information packed into every DNA molecule in every one of your cells. So you got 3 to 5 trillion cells in your body, all containing a full code of DNA that makes what you are. In fact, it's so complete, we could take a cell off of your nose right there and extract all the DNA out of that one little nose cell, and we'll have enough information, all the information necessary to create a whole new clone of you. Isn't that incredible? And every one of your cells has all that information. Now that's Incredibly complex. Now compare what we're doing. Here we've got all this information packed into our cells, sending the signal out, hey, I'm here, look at this intelligent design signal. Can you recognize the difference between this signal and a natural signal? Now look at this. What kind of signals are we sending out in outer space? Dit, dit, dash, 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 dit, dit, dit. I mean, you can't get any more simple than that. And here we've got the DNA molecule, the DNA code built into every life form running around Earth with this incredibly complex code, and we can't even recognize or come to a conclusion it was intelligently designed, but we're looking for a simple dit, 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 dash, 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 dit, dit, dit. Oh, there's life out there. I mean, how? There's no comparison. We're scanning the heavens for evidence of an intelligent designer, and we have something far more complex in its code than anything we're looking for in outer space. Much more complex than we are sending into outer space. Now, how many are familiar with the Human Genome Project? All right. Some of you guys are familiar with the Human Genome Project. It was a fantastic endeavor started in the 1960s. They figured, based on the technology of the time, that they would have the genome, the human genome, mapped out, where all the genes are on our chromosome, by the year 2050. It's 2013 right now. Why, the technological advances had brought us to a point of just lightning speed, cracking the code, and not only did we map it out by the year 2000, it was a little sloppy, but that was the goal, year 2000, start the new millennium with this Human Genome Project, and discovered that there are 3 billion codes, letters, A, T, C, G, 3 billion letters. That makes up the alphabet of our code. Isn't that incredible? So by the year 2000 we had that, and then there's been a lot of cleaning up, and now a lot of study of proteins and getting the code down. Well, after it was discovered, there's only about 30,000 genes that make us what we are. The rest of it is junk. And the evolutionist, Richard Dawkins, anybody heard of that name? One of the most antagonist, belligerent, nasty, foul-mouthed evolutionists and critics of creationists and God altogether. Had some really, really vicious things to say about God. But here we have an individual. We have the evolutionists, atheists, who are saying that, who are telling us that this junk, DNA, certainly there wouldn't be an intelligent designer, much less a God who would create this code with a bunch of junk. If anything is proof for evolution, it's all this junk, DNA. Well, there's this project now, a global project called ENCODE. And this particular project globally is just collecting all the information. It's not doing the research. It's sifting through all the information because there's so much to sift through and make sense out of it. And they point out that during the early debates about Human Genome Project, researchers had predicted that only a few % of the human genome sequence encoded proteins. Guess what? It's not junk. It turns out all that was supposed as junk DNA really is not junk DNA at all. As Dr. Green had pointed out, we now know that this conclusion was wrong. Well, this is important information to know. This is new stuff, by the way, as of 2012. So one of the things I point out to my students, when you hear about these missing links that pop up and the headlines read, oh, we finally found the missing link. Just remember, that's what they said last year. Why do they use the word finally? We finally found it.
They don't have it.
Because the last, here's what happens. Just give it time. It's like this. They come out with these conclusions and these statements and makes headlines. We finally found the missing link. I said, just wait a week or two, maybe 6 weeks or so on. But you're going to find out, or if you hunt for it, it's not going to make headline news. It's not the missing link after all. That's why every time, about once a year around spring, finally we found the missing link. They keep popping up with these news stories. And you have to ask, what about last year? I thought we did finally find it. No, see, they just bury the story. Same way here. Since 2000, we've had all this junk DNA, but with ENCODE and with new information and studies now on the DNA molecule, we discover it's not junk at all. The deeper we probe into the space of the genome, the more complex it becomes. It's a phenomenal molecule. In fact, what they're discovering is that while there are about 30,000 molecules that actually code for what you are, your features and behavior, actually, all the rest of it is not junk, but it's switches, telling the molecule in the cell when these genes for your features are going to be turned on and turned off, and control whether it's going to be turned on at tandem with another gene or not, or by itself. I mean, complexities. It's incredible. This thing is not junk. This is full of switches. Wow, not just information for your features, but switches for control. Wow. All right, let's shift gears out of the molecular world here, and how are we doing? Okay. All right. It is very interesting, very interesting. All right. Let's look at the eye, and I think this little switch-up will be good for us and give us a little breather out of the molecular world. I'm going to show you some really interesting designs in nature that just defy explanation in the process of evolution. The eye. Robert Jastrow is a guy that I read. He's an evolutionist. But the reason why I like reading his stuff is he likes to critique evolution. He likes to point out, we got a weakness here, a flaw here, this isn't being answered. Hey, the evolution's been on the bandwagon about this or that, but, we really need to rethink this process. So I really appreciate that. He is trying to be the scientist in evolution and really buck the system where, for the most part, most evolutionists just accept what they've been told in school, and then they continue to perpetuate it. But the critiquing of evolution is really discouraged. There's a world of intimidation out there to prevent you from really examining. But let's talk about the eye. Now, the eye is truly unnaturally complex. I mean, when you think about where did this eye come from and how could it possibly have evolved? You have this incredible eye with these muscles that control the iris, which is allowing a certain amount of light to come in. It's responding automatically depending on whether it's dark outside or light outside. And you know how your eye is working. The doctor flashes the light in your eye and the pupil goes, shuts down, too much light. I mean, talk about knowing how to do that. And then you've got all the muscles in the eye controlling it so that they're coordinated between two eyes, not just one eye. Unless you're a chameleon, you can be chameleon, this sort of thing. And then you've got all the layers built in, the incredibly complex neurons that are on the back of the retina, which pick up, they're called rods and cones. They're picking up light waves that read at different frequencies, so you can read color, or just shadows, so you have black and white. You have this spread across the back of your eye. So complex, the back of the eye is actually considered a part of the brain. That's how complex it is. And then it feeds all that information, all that circuitry, feeds all those signals, photons hitting the back of your eye, trips off electrochemical signal, passes through the axons of the neurons, and goes through the optic nerve up into the brain, feeds that back there, and then your brain flip-flops your images around. Then that's an interesting story in itself. and then it starts reading and interpreting all those little digitized signals. And here we are looking at each other and we don't even think about it. It's amazing how ignorant you can be and still function. That's right, you don't have to be 100% correct to function, right? We are proof of that. Now, Robert Jastrow says this: the eye appears to have been designed. No designer of telescopes could have done a better job. How could this marvelous instrument have evolved by chance through a succession of random events? Many people in Darwin's day agreed with theologian William Polly, who commented, "There cannot be a design without a designer." Now, I'm telling you, Jastrow is not a creationist. He's an evolutionist. He's just astounded by the fact that it happened anyway. I mean, he poses the question, how could anything this marvelous and complex just come about by natural means as a product of evolution? Well, he's not concluding it couldn't have happened. What he's saying is, astoundingly, it has happened. Wow. Dr. Gould is speaking of the eyes of early trilobites, that evolutionists like, as simple creatures. He says, for example, that in the trilobites, never has there been have their eyes been exceeded for complexity or acuity, sharpness, vision, by later arthropods. I regard the failure to find a clear vector of progress in life's history as the most puzzling fact of the fossil record. Now, you'll never see that in your biology textbooks, I guarantee you. But anyway, the eye is one incredible, marvelous instrument here, and you got two of them, which is pretty phenomenal in itself. Now, when we talk about the brain here, this is amazing just to talk about the human brain. The human brain, you got about 3 pounds of gray matter up here, and then you've got a whole system of axons, white matter, that run through your spinal cord and out into your limbs. And it controls every organ and every feature and function in your body. It's an incredible thing, all put up in here in a box that might be about 1 liter and only operates on about 10 watts of power and operates at a speed of maybe in the area of petaflops.
What?
Yeah. What about those gigahertz? So, and we thought gigahertz, megahertz was big. And, yeah, incredible. Now, consider this. What we're talking about here, the processing, make that equal with a computer, we're talking about trillions of decisions being made every second by the human brain. Trillions. Trillions. Isn't that incredible? Because you see, think about all the things that you're aware of. Now multiply that by thousands just for what you are taking, just your eyes, taking in all this information. You're focused on something up here on the front. But you are aware of everything here in your field of vision, but your brain is taking all that information in, but it's selecting out that which you want to give attention to, but everything's still being brought into your brain. And your brain has to process it and do something with it. I'll give you an example. If we're all standing around talking in here, and it's noisy, and it's crowded, and you're trying to hear the person you're talking to, and you're speaking up loud, and everybody's doing that in here. And all of a sudden you hear your name and say, "What? Someone's talking about me." Now wait. How did you hear your name? You see, every conversation in this room is being recorded and processed by your brain. You didn't know that. You thought, "Man, I can barely hear what this person is saying to me. I'm trying so hard." And then you hear your name. And here you're trying to focus on what you can't even figure out what this person is saying in front of you. And here you hear your name in the back. You know why? Because your brain is processing all of the conversations. And it brings to the forefront of your conscious that which is important. And your name is important. And so you go bing, and you go, huh? Now, imagine That's everything you see is being processed by your brain every second. Every noise is being processed. Every sense of feel and smell and taste, it's all being processed. All of it, but you're not aware of it. Because your brain knows how to process through that and say, that's not important, that's not important, and it only brings a small portion of that which is really important of all the stimulus coming into your eye. Basically, you are a computer that is always turned on in the I/Os. You know, you're taking in all this information. Keypad and keyboards and all this stuff. Your senses are the means of taking in and gathering all the information over your surroundings. If you had to process and be aware of it all, you'd be like this. Blue screen. You know what that means. It's too much. I can't handle it. You see, the computer can't either, but your brain, I mean, it's so remarkably complex, being able to manage a multitude of trillions of bits of data just inundating and being able to process it so that you can focus on that which is important. Isn't that incredible to think about? And that just evolved by accident. All right, with that kind of response, I don't need to give you these amazing quotes. It's so self-evident. And then body symmetry. I'm always amazed. You know, if you had something by accident, you know, if you spit out a piece of gum you've been chewing haphazardly, no particular, you know, thought about chewing it, you're just chewing it, and then spit it out on the ground. Has it ever looked anything like something like that? I mean, things that come about as a result of accident look like an accident. Why aren't we a blob? Why do we have an arm here and an arm here, and not an arm here and an arm here, or an arm here or an arm here? I mean, that would be accidental, wouldn't it? This doesn't look like an accident. And think about all the animals out there with body symmetry. Whether they be amorphous or bisymmetrical, doesn't matter what kind of symmetry they have, that does not suggest accident. That's a design, just body symmetry. And then I came across an article in the Smithsonian Journal one time. It was talking about how they look to nature for design ideas to make their boats faster and more efficient and their planes fly better. Where are they going to? The accident. The mindless accidents have put together better and more efficient things than man with all his brain power and computer know-how have ever done. So they go look at the accidents. Now wait, if man cannot produce that which the accidents, which nature has produced, doesn't that suggest that there might be something more intelligent than man himself that has put all this together in the first place? Amen. Yeah. And then you've got instinctive powers, and you're probably familiar with that here in Alaska, and you got birds that are flying to Hawaii without it. I mean, there's no landmarks out there. How do these birds get from Alaska, from the shores of Alaska to Hawaii and back? How do they do that when the parents have flown off and those baby birds are off in the air and they have no experience and no previous experience of getting to Hawaii? Tell you what, that's a little pin out there in the middle of the ocean. Just a slight variation and they're stuck, running out of energy before they get there. It is truly remarkable when you start looking at life. I'll give you one more example. This is called the bombardier beetle. I don't know what you have up here in Alaska. Out in California, we had the little black bombardier beetle. We call them stink bugs. And I like to play with them and point them at people backwards. And that was always a lot of fun. Yeah. But this is a bombardier beetle. He's a little different. This particular one's a little different. That's about 100 degrees Celsius, boiling point of water, that's being squirted out the back end of this particular beetle. He's got two chemical pouches that when they're squirted out simultaneously, they mix in stream and have a chemical reaction that produces that caustic hydrochloric acid and raises the temperature up to the boiling point of water. So when it splashes the face of its predator, the predator runs away and says, "I don't want to touch that thing again." That's painful. Acid, hot acid. Now, can you imagine this kind of beetle evolving by accident? There it is. It's oops, the bag was a little leaky. Boom. I tell you what, it makes you wonder how such a thing could happen before it keeps blowing its rear end off. I mean, how are you going to produce new baby bombardier beetles and so that it can keep evolving, you know, by accident? It's just not going to happen. It either did it right the first time or it's not going to do it at all. It's just truly incredible things that happen.
What about the plants that have certain?
Oh yeah, so like the pitcher plant, you might have a pitcher plant, or the Venus fly plant.
You know, the symbiotic relationships between animals and plants and animals to animals, that, you know, one produces the other, that they need each other. I mean, that's not an accident.
You're absolutely right. When you start thinking about the symbiotic relationships, you start looking at, these are principles that we're getting into right now, irreducible complexity. How many are familiar with that term, irreducible complexity? Michael Behe. All right, Michael Behe had introduced this on a molecular level, but the idea was, in order for a system to operate, you have to have all the parts in play. Otherwise, neither one exists. And so when whether you're talking about plants and insects in a symbiotic relationship, or you're talking about molecules, the example that is used is like a mousetrap. A basic mousetrap can't get any simpler. You need your beater bar. You need a spring to flip it. You need a latch to hold it. You need a platform to hold it all into place, right? And then you need your little platform to trigger it. All right. Michael Behe said that illustrates the irreducible complexity. You take you take the spring off, you don't have a mousetrap. Take the beater bar off, you don't have a mousetrap. Take the platform away, you don't have a mousetrap. You got to have it all in play. So part of the investigation then, by creation scientists or intelligent design craft, is to find and discover what is truly irreducible in its complexity. That is, you can reduce it down to a certain point, and after that, you need all the points together. Now, so it's a great example talking about symbiosis, or on a molecular level, or even complexity in the cell. When you have complexity like this in a cell, it's been said that the cell, although it's a single cell and it seems rather simple, simpler than 3 trillion cells sitting on a chair here, but when you consider the complexity inside a cell, it is far more complex than the entire infrastructure of New York City or Philadelphia or any other kind, the most complex city network you can imagine. That's what's going on. I was sitting in a cellular physiology class at the University of Arkansas, and it was a grad level course, and we got into a part where we were talking about feedback mechanisms and controls over the DNA and the proteins being produced, and how if you have a lack of one product here, the gene's going to be turned on, but once you get enough product, it's going to turn that gene off and turn on another gene. I mean, it's feedback mechanisms and control. And I said, Dr. Evans, after class, I went up to him, I said, how is it that the control can be so specific, so efficient, and so simultaneous, instantaneous? It just seems so remarkable. How is that explained? He said, no idea. I said, man, it makes you think it was designed that way. And he said, it does. I'll tell you, One of the ways evolution gets away with just promoting itself is the generalizations. People don't really truly understand the complexity of a single cell. There's no way this thing could advance by itself. As I'll show you tomorrow night, the probabilities are against it, and for good reason. The law of biogenesis says it can't, a living cell cannot just arise from non-living materials. It isn't going to happen. Why? Because the complexity is so great. It defies the natural properties of molecules themselves. It cannot happen. So we have incredible complexity. Here's this irreducible complexity. This is probably the best known example of irreducible complexity. I know that there's a lot of critics about Dr. Behe, and there's been evolutionists who say, I can come up with a simpler mousetrap. Does it astound anybody? You see, when you got someone who wants to argue against irreducible complexity, yeah, Dr. Kenneth Miller is one evolutionist. He's an anti-creationist, and he said, oh, I can come up with a simpler mousetrap. He reduced it down to a toothpick. Now, when have you seen a mouse get speared by a toothpick? And yet, that is the lengths to which these guys go to prove Dr. Behe and others wrong, the creationists wrong. Oh, irreducible complexity, I can still reduce it. And so he reduces it to a single part, a toothpick. Yes,
they can reduce a mousetrap to that, maybe they can't reduce a cell to that.
Hey,
that's the point.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There are some. I'll tell you a story tomorrow night. There is one in particular. There's some guys who are trying to do it. But with this cell, Dr. Behe had used this as an example. This is a flagella motor. On a bacteria, or even Forcilia, and there's different types of motors, but this is one type of motor. It's got bushings, it's got a rotor, it's got a hook to hold the flagella in place, it's got the whip there to move the bacteria, it's got layers, bushings, it's got 40 different proteins involved in making this motor work so the bacteria can move. And if you're missing any one of those pieces, you have a non-moving flagella. Well, what's the point of having a flagella or different pieces of parts just coming together by chance over millions of years until finally, we've got a motor, now we can start moving? That's not going to happen. That defies natural selection in the evolutionary scenario itself. Now, their explanation is that it starts out simple, it's preserved, and then it keeps adding itself by usage, even different function. But that is mind-boggling as well, to imagine how that could even happen. Now, this brings up a good point. And remember this for Dr. Evolution. There's always an answer. It doesn't have to be a good answer, it just has to be an answer. There's always an explanation. But remember, an explanation is not evidence. It's nothing more than an explanation. Now, here's just another picture. We look at the complexity of this motor. This is a different type of flagella motor. But when you start looking at the complexity and breaking it down into its components on a molecular level, you do have to ask the question, was that by design or did that just happen by accident? It's incredible to imagine.
What is that flagellum bacteria?
It is like a little whip on the tail of, it's like a tail on a bacterial cell. And it whips around and causes motion. It's called motility. And it gives advantage to bacteria because they can escape. Well, if they get in your body, for example, you've got a bacteria there. Your body's going to mount an attack, so you got your phagocytes and your lymphocytes running around chasing this little critter around. And it's, got a motor going and trying to escape attack. All right. Well, I think we'll save this part for tomorrow night, and we'll do a little Q&A here if you got some questions. Don't want to overdose you too much, There's a lot going on here. There's a lot more that can be said. But here's the point for this evening. That is that the design argument for the creation science model is, number one, credible evidence. How do we know that? Well, the evolutionists use it too. I mean, they're hypocrites to say that you can't use it. When they use it, they're looking for aliens and outer space. Now, what makes it more credible for the creation science model? Well, compare the DNA molecule code with the signals we're sending in outer space. Which one's more complex? DNA. Which one's more likely to be designed by an intelligent designer? The DNA molecule, far more than anything we're looking for in outer space, with the idea that we're going to conclude, simple design, God. No, I'm sorry, not God, alien. Now, if you haven't seen that film, Ben Stein's film, Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed, Colleen and I were watching that when it came out, and I'll tell you, Richard Dawkins is in there. And I don't mind talking about him. He just blasts creationists. He's really nasty to the creationists, to the Christian. But Ben Stein has him. It's the last interview. It's the last interview that is taking place in the movie, and Stein just presses him for questions. And I'll tell you, I'm going to tell the story again tomorrow night, but it is so nice. I was telling Colleen after that interview, man, if I was Dawkins, I wouldn't be able to sleep for the rest of my life. I mean, I'd be tossing and turning in bed. What a humiliating experience. I mean, the guy, the question during the interview, Stein did such a good job of pressing some questions. But he had said this. So, Dawkins, what do you think the chance is that there really is a God? Oh, there's no chance. Well, give me a probability. Give me a percent number. I feel uncomfortable giving a number. Well, 50%, Stein says. No, God's much more unlikely than that. 51%. No, much more. Oh, he presses him and he finally comes with 99% probability that there is no God. That means there's a 1% probability that there is a God, right? So, isn't that funny that such a hard-nosed atheist is going to say, oh, there's 1%. Well, now, in his book, he wrote that there's a 1 in 0.00, like 1 in 10,000ths of a chance that life could arise from lifeless molecules. Do you know that what he did compared to what he told Ben Stein and what he wrote in his book, that God is more likely, he just said God is more likely than life arising by natural means. Now, he didn't intend to say that, I guarantee you. I put that out on YouTube, boy, I got the nasty comments. I'll tell you what, that crowd is really unmerciful. But nonetheless, it was sort of done in tongue-in-cheek, and it wasn't taken that way. But it was funny to catch that and point out that here you have a hard-nosed atheist, but he wasn't about to say 100% chance that God does not exist. No, he left it open to 1%. And when you actually look at all the evidence, just for design, it really screams at us. Design. All right, are there any questions before we wrap things up? Yes, ma'am.
Why are evolutionists so dreadfully terrified